I'm Owen Palmer, also known as Owen The Geek, also known as Hat Tricks. I'm a producer-engineer, and we're here in my North London studio where I work with a variety of artists, mainly on sort of electronic music. And today we're going to look at some naughty things that can happen inside Cubase. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to play, have fun, and see where we go, which I like to do very regularly. So let's just jump into it. Is that all right? One of my favourite toys is Pad Shop. I've come to Pad Shop, and you can do a lot of crazy things with Pad Shop. Pad Shop works with samples. It's a granular synth, which means that you put samples in, it splits those samples into grains and then rearranges them to build up a new sound. That's the theory, but you don't have to necessarily use it strictly like that. You can use it as a sort of unison engine for getting sort of super saw-ish kinds of sounds, lovely pads, which obviously I think it's supposed to be aimed at, but I don't necessarily use it that way. Anyway, just with a sine wave, which is the default. In fact, I can't remember if that's the default or if that's just my default, but we can do things with that. So at the moment I have 2 grain streams of sine wave, and I'm going to detune those. Actually, I'll go up to 3 and I'll detune those with the spread. And you end up with this kind of chorused. Whoa, that's a bit loud. I'll turn the decay down, then we can which is quite nice, put a bit of release on that. Bit clicky at the start, so I'll turn up the attack envelope just 2 milliseconds. So I find that instantly fun. I can do a lot of things with that, as long as, I mean, I don't even know what tempo or what genre, I don't even need to think about those things. I just find this fun to jam with and play with, so I'll just get on with it now. I could get a more complex signal by turning up the number of voices. Oh, that's pretty loud though, let's turn that down. And I'll increase the detune amount. The more detune there is, the faster it kind of pulses. It gets really, really coarse. He starts to sound like an electric piano. Probably a bit too much, sounds a bit sickly. Let's go down again. That's okay. Yeah, I'm not really sure where I'd go from there, so I'll just lay that down and build on top. So one of the nice things about using Cubase is you can just record with no metronome, no tempo, and then tidy up the MIDI afterwards. So I'll do that. Oh wait, but I've auto quantize on. I better switch that off because that will mess me up. Okay, let's try. Yeah, there was something in there that I quite liked, so I'll just chop up the MIDI. I'll sort of loop it around where I was, so that was the start of what I liked. awful timing, but never mind. I'll just cut to there. That's where the loop repeats. And then I can time stretch that to an even number of bars. I don't think this is going to go well. Awful. So now I've tidied that up, I've quantized it a little bit. I'm going to load in another instance of Pad Shop. And this time I'm going to go for a pre-prepared sample. I've got a load of user samples that I've organized and put into this. So I know if I type str, I'm going to get string samples from various sources, but never you mind where those are. That'll do. And what I can do with that one string sample is increase the number of voices to, say, 8. That's pretty loud, but if I give them random starts, what it will do is it will do 8 versions of that sample looping, all starting at random spots. And then I can give them some random detune, and then I can set the range of random detunes. I'm going to set that to about 14 cents. If I give that a slow attack and slow release, that's the sound I get. Bit loud. Wrong chord. Let's go again. I'll go low as well. I probably should have recorded that. That would have been good. And probably should know how to play it. And I can tidy that up quickly. Well, I'm actually already quite bored with this. It's okay, it's a nice vibe, but I have a solution. So what I'm going to do, and I love doing this, I'll grab another instance of Pad Shop and I'll layer it up. In fact, I can just copy and paste the one I've already got. So I'll duplicate that version of Pad Shop, and now I'm going to find a different sample to play these chords. Just by going through samples that I've pre-prepared. So I'm going to go through the Vox samples. These are like vocal-based choirs and that kind of thing. and I want a bit of more movement on the siny thing on this, so I'm going to put loads of delay on that, just using the standard ping pong delay. I chucked this one up an octave, I quite like that, it's got a bit more texture to it. I'm not actually intending to use this and move forward with this in the style and in the form that it's in. What I'm actually doing now is building a texture that I'll be able to use for something a bit more fun and daring straight afterwards. I now have Retrologue, which is great for your sort of virtual analog synth stuff, and I'm going to put this into unison mode, which is called multi on here. The unison on Retrologue is really strong, as you can hear, so it's best to get it really tight. Or two, and I don't want this to be quite so harsh. In fact, I'll put a delay on that as well, and I'm going to do the same sort of delay settings. And by the magic of video editing, we're now inside Cubase 10, which means I've got this delay plugin and I can put it in the right start mode instead of the left start mode, which you couldn't do in the previous versions of Cubase. I don't know why I want to do that, just because. Yeah, so I'm just going to play some nonsense into there, really. That will do nicely. That first sound is still a little bit too loud. Sometimes the delays get on my nerves, and I have a solution to that, which is to put Melder's M-Utility plugin on everything and silence when playback is off. Much nicer. Okay, for this sound I'm doing the same thing. I've got a string sample, I turn the number of voices up, the start position to random, and a bit of random pitch as well. Add more octaves. Oh gosh. Record something in quick. That'll do. I'll just mix that down a little bit, as in turn the volume down. And I'll add another one for something a bit lower because everything's a bit light and airy at the moment. Quite like that. It's a flute sample I just happened upon. Quantize. And now I can begin the next part, the next phase of this process, which is to start an audio track, and that audio track has the output, the main output of the project as its input. So when I record on this audio track, it will record everything into one piece of audio. So now that I have that as one piece of audio, I can load that into the sampler, well, the sampler track. And this is exactly the kind of thing that I was hoping to get, sort of like an old school hip hop. Maybe kind of a bit ravey. About what I want to do with that. I've got an ensemble inside MXXX by Melda Productions, which which is basically like multiband compression, but in a particular way that I like it. And now that I've got that in place, I can mess around with the sample start time. Probably needs a bit of old school reverb on there as well. I've got the MPX reverb plugin. I like the Lexicon MPX reverb plugin because it sounds like a crappy old digital reverb. So now I've got this sound. And well, if you liked what I was doing before, you might not like this whatsoever. And if you like this, you might not like what I did before. In fact, that brings up a point that I'd like to talk about, which is these days, I hear quite a bit of musical snobbery. You know, people who kind of say, oh, I couldn't like that, no. And I think that the reason, or part of the reason for that is because music exists inside culture. So every genre of music, every style of music, every musical act, every artist, every singer, every producer, they're part of a culture. There's a cultural context to it all. And I think some people are offended by the idea of liking a certain type of music because it clashes with their sort of cultural values. Similar to the way that you might choose how you dress or choose the type of clothes that you wear or who you vote for. These things are part of our identity, and it can feel like a kind of violation of our identity, even to try something that's maybe outside the comfort zone. But I actually think that for music and for creativity, the best possible thing you can do is just let go of all that and say, what can I get from this? Where is the pleasure in this music? Where can I find it? Once you take that attitude, then you become open to way more things. And the interesting thing is that something that may have seemed very different at first and maybe at odds with your sort of identity or your cultural values, you may find that you have a lot to learn from that. And I don't want to sound like I'm getting on my soapbox and saying, hey, we should all be hippies around a campfire and sing Kumbaya or some other culturally relevant campfire song, but I do believe that there's a lot to learn from being polyamorous about music. Okay. So that sounds quite ravey to me, but I could go in a drum and bass direction with that. I could go in a hardcore direction with that, quite obviously, or I could do maybe something more housey or like a techno track. There's lots of different directions, or hip hop, as I said earlier. It could be a vibey hip hop record with the right sort of beat. But I don't know. But the point is, the door is wide open, and that's great for creativity because it means there's no right and wrong answers. And when you play with stuff with no right and wrong answers, sometimes you find, actually, I don't know what that is, but I like it. And that can be the seed for something that builds into something great. I've just been playing around with a project and I'm on Groove Agent 5, which is new to me. It's a kick drum that I made separately, and I've just recorded it into an audio channel in Cubase so that I could drop it into Groove Agent. So Groove Agent does do like layers and envelopes and that kind of thing, but the thing is I'd already done all of that work, so. And I've got this crash sample too. There's also a snare in the project, but I haven't quite got the snare sounding how I want. This is really early stages, so I haven't bothered to commit the snare into Groove Agent just yet, but I will do when it's a bit more to my liking, because once it's in here, there's so much more I can do with it in terms of sculpting the sound, and certainly it's much easier to, you know, bash out patterns on the keyboard and that kind of thing, and certainly doing like rolls and build-ups and that kind of thing. I much prefer to work in MIDI. I find it just easier, quicker, more flexible, and if I need something done in the audio domain, I'll just record that out of Groove Agent, process it in the audio domain, and then slip it back in on one of the pads. So here it is with the snare. And this sort of genre is it's kind of new territory for me. I mean, I like to play around with different genres and just experiment. The way I normally go about it is I'll listen to what's out there, and I'll get a load of references together, and I'll sort of whistle through them. I'll really listen to them very closely, and I'll try to find a sort of top 10 for me in terms of musical content. What do I feel emotively, but also in terms of mix, and those aren't necessarily the same thing. Sometimes you have maybe a top 10 for musical content and then a top 10 for production and mix down. I try to find the tracks that are decent on both fronts, the decent music and decent production and mix. So for this, I got a load of references together, and I spent a long time listening to them. I use this Metric AB plugin, and in here I've got, you know, about 10 references that I went through that are roughly the same sort of genre, the same sort of style, the same sort of tempo. And I listened to what I like about each one, and I thought about how I can incorporate what I like about each of them into one piece and bring to it what I feel might be missing. And certainly I like these sort of drum patterns and this kind of snare style. That's a little bit, it's new for me, and as I say, I'm not quite happy with this snare yet, but it's good enough to show you what I've got going on. And one thing you might find interesting is this down here, which is a dry copy of the kick drum. I'd sampled the kick drum at an earlier phase in producing the kick drum, and what I do is I put some reverb on that, so it's 100% wet, and then I just pull away the muddy frequencies with an EQ, and I use this as air for the kick drum. So when you layer this up with the regular kick drum, you get that kind of sound. And I find that makes it a bit beefier, a bit meatier, certainly a bit airier. Airier? Well, you get the idea. Certainly gives it some more air. So the next sound I want to look at is the bass sound, which I've programmed in Dimitri Sez's diversion synthesizer. It doesn't sound like much, but what I've done is I've designed it to sound a little bit like an 808. I haven't bothered with the attack because it's going to be layered with the kick drum anyway. But it just sort of gradually decreases in intensity. I've got a bit of RM in there for some flavour as well. Gives it some harmonics. That's just inside the synth. And then I've added some tremolo, very, very lightly. That's just to give a bit of movement on the bass, which I think always helps to make a track feel full and powerful. Then there's some saturation. The tone of this was quite particular. And then I've got Shaper Box, which cuts the entire signal when the kick drum comes in. It does let you split the frequency, so you could just do low frequencies if you wanted to, but most of the time it's just best to do the entire signal. No point splitting it or anything like that. So here's that with the drums. And now that I've got the camera on me, I'm thinking probably the kick drum's a little bit sharp and things like that. I'm not too worried about those things at this stage. I'm just having fun and playing around. So I was messing around with some chords, something a little bit like this. And that's in this sequence like this. And here's the piano with the effects. And then, as the style dictates, here it is with some tremolo as well. The next layer is this synth, also going through that bass. And I have a layer for the bass as well that's a bit more synthy, that gives it some texture in the mids. And now the synths and the piano together with the tremolo. And here's all the layers together then. By the way, I never really settled on the rhythm for the tremolo, so I like actually playing around with this a little bit. But actually, I think the 1/8, certainly with the phase that I gave it, it gives it a kind of jerky motion, which I like. Seems to kind of run against the kick and snare groove, which I like. It's funky. I'm probably not 100% happy with the texture there, with the tonality of it, but again, I really don't care. I want to get on with the creative ideas first, and I can tidy up all those things. I'm confident that will be sorted. I mean, it's okay, it's not awful. It's certainly workable. Next, I've got some homemade white noise effects. You'll notice that ducks every so often. That's because it's going through a bus, which I call my else bus. And that has shaper box on it from Cable Guys. And what that allows me to do is cut all the volume whenever the snare comes in. So that gives the snare loads of space to be super clear and super loud. I don't need to worry about headroom so much. I don't need to worry about how the individual frequencies are mixing and matching together. None of that stuff really matters, because for that very brief moment, everything disappears and only the snare plays. And in fact, you don't really hear that when you have everything in the mix. It just sounds like a clear mix. Well, to a point, you know what I mean. So then I've added these white noise shakers, which is basically just a noise generator going into an EQ to get the shape of it. And then shaper box, I've done this twice. I've got one shaper box to give me the general sort of rhythm, and then another shaper box to duck a little bit when the kick drum plays. Now, I had added hi-hats, I had added sort of typical hi-hats, but I don't like the sound of them at all, so I'm actually going to switch that up right now and do that in Groove Agent. Okay, so I've just done this quick hi-hat pattern, but I've got no sound in here yet. This is on an F#1 in Groove Agent, so I just need to load my sample onto the F#1. And then I can audition the samples in this folder quite easily. Right, so I found a sample that I quite like, enough to carry on with things anyway. I'm just going to turn that down a bit. So just got to get the right level on this sample. And that'll do. That's one of the things I like about Groove Agent, is that you can easily just slip a sample in and then go through a load of samples very, very quickly in place with the MIDI. the final element, I wanted a bit of vocal, so I went through some computer music samples and I found this little vocal here. I've chucked it in the project, but I haven't really processed it. It's not even timed up or in the right place yet. I just find this very creatively useful, and it's just a small phrase which generally for this kind of music that works. So I thought I'd just quickly play you this as it is now.
If you want this love to start.
And I'd just like to make the point that however good you think your samples are, sometimes a sample will really, really shine when you just play it in the context of what you're working on. So you might think that this is a sample pack that's maybe 8 out of 10, which is pretty good, but when you find that magic combination of what you're doing and how that sample sounds in that context, it can go quickly from an 8 to a 10. Now, I'm not saying that's a 10 because it needs a bit of work, it needs a bit of timing up and that kind of thing, but I like the potential there. That's about all we've got time for now, so make sure to join us for part 2.